Coming up today, French President Francois Hollande says France is committed to destroying the Islamic State militant group after last weekend's terror attacks in Paris. In its first ever statement on a political issue, the G20 vows to conduct joint action against growing global terrorism and choke terror groups' means of financing themselves. Plus, G20 leaders give their final stamp of approval to a major overhaul of the international rules governing corporate taxes. Stay tuned for these stories and more. Hello to our viewers around the world. It's 6 a.m. on Tuesday, November 17th here in Seoul. Thank you for joining us. I'm Mark Broome. Our top story this morning, French President Francois Hollande has once again reiterated that his country is at war with the militant group that calls itself Islamic State following last Friday's terror attacks in Paris. Speaking during a joint session of both houses of parliament, Hollande said France would destroy IS by intensifying its campaign in Syria. He also said the attacks were planned in Syria by IS, organised in Belgium and carried out, of course, in France. This week's airstrikes against Syria will just be the start. According to Hollande, he said the aircraft carrier Charles de Gaulle will go to the eastern Mediterranean on Thursday. This will triple France's operational capacity. The French leader will also propose a bill to extend the state of emergency for France by 3 months, but the opposition in France is resisting those plans. Also, on Monday, a new IS propaganda video emerged. It warned countries taking part in airstrikes on Syria. The militants in the video said the nations would suffer the same fate as France. They also threatened an unspecified attack on Washington, D.C. Russian President Vladimir Putin has suggested that Russia is now ready to improve its strained relations with Western countries that had worsened in the wake of the Syrian crisis. Speaking at a press conference following the G20 summit in Turkey, Putin said the summit was less tense than last year's meeting in Australia. The Russian president then stressed the need to look ahead and combine their efforts in the fight against the common threat. He said that instead of arguing about the efficiency of Russia's actions and the US-led anti-terrorist coalition in Syria, the world must come together to challenge terrorism. On a related note, Putin pointed out, citing Russian intelligence, that the Islamic State militant group was receiving financing from 40 countries, including some members of the G20. Now, wrapping up their two-day summit in Turkey, G20 leaders adopted a joint statement on Monday, reaffirming their collective will to fight terrorism. It marks the first time the G20 has issued a written statement on any political issue. Our Hwang Sung-hee reports.
In a rare joint statement, the G20 leaders condemned the heinous terrorist attacks in Paris and in Ankara, calling them unacceptable affront to all humanity. The G20 summit usually focuses on economic issues, but the violence in Paris just days before the annual event changed the tone and focus of the talks. Underscoring the fight against terrorism as a major priority for the G20 member nations, the leaders stressed the importance of fully implementing UN Security Council resolutions and other international conventions. As some of the specific measures, the leaders agreed to cut the financing channels of terrorism through swift implementation of Financial Action Task Force standards. This had been proposed by President Park at a working dinner a day earlier. And to tackle the growing flow of foreign terrorist fighters, the leaders agreed on operational information sharing for better border management and travel detection. On the economic front, South Korea was recognized as a role model for structural reform.
After ranking first place last year for growth strategies, Korea came in second for putting them best into action. With that, we reaffirmed our global image as a role model country that makes the most effective policies and carries them out the best.
President Park's call for structural reform for inclusive growth was also included in the joint statement. Now President Park will leave for Manila, Philippines for the APEC summit. There she is expected to continue discussions for inclusive growth and lay out specific policy directions based on South Korea's development experience. 황상희, Arirang News, Antalya.
Now, staying with the G20 summit, and world leaders at that event in Turkey also endorsed a set of measures designed to tackle global corporate tax avoidance. The newly adopted plan seeks to oblige multinational corporations to pay tax in the country where they make profits. The move comes following public anger over reports that huge multinationals like Google, Starbucks and McDonald's hardly pay any tax because they skillfully exploit legal loopholes or get preferential tax deals from governments. South Korea plans to implement the measures gradually starting from next year. The Korean government has vowed to rev up efforts to better protect its citizens at home and abroad in the wake of the Paris terror attacks. Seoul is placing extra emphasis on Koreans living in France and other high-profile targets like the United Kingdom, Germany and Turkey. Won Ji-yeon has the details.
No longer a safe haven. That's how serious the Korean government raised the latest terror attacks that killed at least 120 people in Paris. Following up on the first emergency meeting held on Saturday, Seoul vowed to upgrade its protection of its nationals in a second meeting on Monday. Top officials from all relevant agencies, from the police to the presidential office, attended the session chaired by the foreign ministry. The government said terrorists exhibited new and different methods and scale in their attacks, prepared articulately over a considerable period of time.
We take this situation differently from the previous terror attacks that took place in Europe, as the latest one targeted innocent civilians in a massive scale.
Seoul's intel agency and the military will also beef up cooperation to guarantee national security and safety.
The Korean military has reinforced its readiness in case of any possible terror attack. We have inspected safety and security protocols here in the nation's key military facilities and camps deployed overseas.
The Korean embassy in France will keep on contacting with Korean residents and visitors in France in order to check on their well-being. And the same action will be taken to those in other major European countries, including the UK, Germany and Turkey. No Korean was killed or hurt in Friday's terror attacks, but the government immediately issued a travel warning for Paris and cities nearby. Seoul's foreign ministry will hold a third follow-up meeting later this week. Won Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
Now, from Rome to Hong Kong, people have been holding vigils all over the world to mourn the victims of the Paris terror attacks and show their support for the city. Our Shin Se-min attended a vigil in Seoul where crowds of people came despite the rain.
Flowers are being laid, candles lit, and notes that read, "Je suis Paris," are being left here. One by one, French residents, expats, and other local Koreans have come out to the French embassy in Seoul, turning it into one of many tribute sites for the victims in Friday's attacks. It may have happened in Paris, but the world was watching, and now the international community is mourning the massive loss.
As someone with many French friends, the event did not feel distant at all. My feelings just led me to visit a part of France in Korea.
French embassies throughout the world, including the one in Seoul, observed a moment of silence in remembrance of those lost in Friday's attacks. Korea's Prime Minister Hwang Kyo-an and the first Vice Foreign Minister Im Sung-nam also paid tribute to the victims. The embassy in Seoul also invited French nationals to leave messages of condolence in a book that will be sent back to Paris. But despite the sadness and mourning, the Paris attacks have brought many together in hopes of finding peace.
This ideology don't believe in borders, don't believe in, limitations. So what is up to us to we act, we prepare ourselves.
Kind of angry, but then second time we are very happy to see all our people who support us from all the countries. I'm very touched to see that we are not alone.
3 days in, and Seoul had joined in grieving for Paris, coloring the city in blue, white, in red.
One of Seoul's iconic landmarks, the N Tower on Mount Namsan, is also lit in the colors of the French flag. Many other landmarks around the world have taken a similar action in a sign of support for victims in Paris, highlighting that the tragedy was an attack on the international community as a whole. 신세민, Arirang News.
Now, these Islamic State attacks in Paris also sent shockwaves through the local financial market on Monday. The government says it will continue to closely monitor the situation. Arirang has the details.
Despite the Korean stock market already turning bearish due to a possible rate hike from the U.S. Federal Reserve next month, it's now being hit by uncertainty coming from Friday's Paris attacks. Korea's benchmark Kospi dropped more than 1.5% on Monday to close at a near two-month low at 1,943.02. The local currency also plunged against the greenback. But many analysts do not expect panic in the local financial market down the road, saying market reactions to terror attacks are often short-lived. They add global market resilience has increased in line with the growing number of terror attacks over the years. Holding a meeting the same day, the government said it will carefully monitor the financial market and work on minimizing any possible impacts from the recent attacks. It did express concern, though, over the attacks posing a threat to the Eurozone's recovery momentum, that this could drag down the overall economy, including China. The European Union is Beijing's second largest export market. Now all eyes are focused on how the local markets will move on Tuesday after the European and U.S. stock markets react to the attacks and join what is expected to be a global sell-off. Hwang Jie, Arirang News.
Now, Korea's National Assembly has responded to the terror attacks in Paris by discussing moves towards anti-terrorism legislation and also establishing an anti-terrorism response centre. However, the rival parties can't agree on which government body should supervise the centre. Kim Young-gil reports.
The ruling Saenuri Party wants to set up a terrorism response center under the National Intelligence Service to specialize in preventing terrorism in Korea, but condemns the opposition for arguing the NIS would abuse its authority.
The opposition bloc is concerned that the spy agency might use the Anti-Terrorism Center to conduct illegal inspections of anti-government organizations and abuse human rights during intelligence gathering or investigating possible terrorist groups.
The ruling bloc is concerned that in comparison with Western countries rushing to legislate anti-terrorism laws after the U.S. 9/11 attacks, the Korean parliament has consistently failed to do so since 2001. The main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy says, based on past scandals, the NIS cannot be relied upon to supervise a possible anti-terrorism center.
We are against setting up a counter-terrorism centre under the NIS. The NIS has been embroiled in several nationwide scandals involving election meddling, hacking citizens' smartphones, fabricating false espionage cases, and cracking down on leftist groups.
Rather, the NPD suggests establishing an anti-terrorism agency under the Ministry of Science, ICT and Future Planning to deal with monitoring signs of possible terrorist activities and intelligence gathering. The ruling party and the government warned that with 2 million foreigners living in Seoul and with Korea being a traditional staunch U.S. ally, the country is prone to terror attacks from Islamic extremist groups.
Meanwhile, the government confirms that since 2005, more than 70 Koreans have either died or been injured in terrorist attacks in foreign countries. Kim Young-gil, Arirang News.
Now, in other news, nearly 2,000 Volkswagen and Audi owners in Korea have joined a class action lawsuit against the German automaker over its emissions cheating scandal. Korean law firm Balun says 1,999 people are suing the VW Group, Audi Group, VW Korea and local dealerships to cancel their contracts or get a refund for the purchase price of their cars. So far, 6,500 people have submitted documents to participate in the legal action, and that figure is expected to rise. Now, this local law firm, which represents, of course, local consumers, has teamed up with global law firm Quinn Emanuel to sue Volkswagen's HQ in Germany and the US. Well, that's all we have for now. I'm Mark Broome. Thank you, as always, for tuning in to our newscasts, and we'll be back throughout the day with more news. Until then, goodbye.